10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Myself, I'm a man of wealth and taste. Was like the water that splashes on a stone. Parachute woman, land on me tonight. Speech owner, hope you guessed my name. It was a time for a change. Right girl, and she gets me into fights. Waiting for a right girl, we get drunk on Friday night. Drink to the hard-working people. Let's drink to the salt of the earth.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good golly, Miss Molly. Welcome back to another It's Only Talk and Roll on that 70s rock fan channel. I am your host, Brian. That is Brian. And that was a selection of clips, carefully copyright edited together, of tracks from the marvelous album, which is kind of the focal point of today, but we'll talk about a lot more things. Rolling Stones' December 1968 album, Beggars Banquet, which, looking back on that fevered period in rock and in the world in general, 1968-69, it marked for me the ascension, not even the ascension, the ascension of the Stones to claim the title of the world's greatest rock and roll band at the time. Controversial, of course. Many people have their candidates for such a nebulous thing. But yeah, released in December 68, Beggars Banquet was the album where the Stones marked their return to what they did best, creating powerful blues-infused rock music with a swagger that nobody else could replicate. And it launched them on a brilliant 4-album streak, which I would call their golden era. So we're going to talk Beggars Banquet. We're going to talk the Stones in 68 and 69. We're going to talk about some of their competitors. And there may be a few Keith Richards memes along the way. Here and there. And I've got some great, not so many clips we can show in terms of video, but I have some great interview clips with Keith, which are actually very revealing and interesting about that whole period and making of that album. And I'm kind of including Jumpin Jack Flash, even though it's not on the album, because it was recorded at the same time, and much in the manner of many bands, and the singles were not on the albums, so which was a groovy thing to do, I think. But anyway, welcome to everybody that's joined us. I'd like to welcome my two extra special guests today. First of all, my glorious friend, Pope Metallic is the first. How are you, my friend?
Glad to be here, man. And this is an interesting one because it's a band I don't know as much about. Like my parents obviously grew up in the '60s and were hugely into the Stones, but I never really got that deep into the rabbit hole with them, like I did the Who and a bunch of other bands from this one. They were a little more to the mainstream rock side for me. So this will be fun.
Oh yeah, and glad you could make it, mate. I'm sure. Look forward to your as my internet son. I look forward to your perspective.
Indeed.
You could rebel against what I like.
Well, I mean, that is kind of my shtick, isn't it? Rebelling against authority, going my own way. That's kind of the metalhead ethos in a nutshell.
Indeed. But I'd also like to welcome as return to the show my very dear friend, Mr. Alan Granny Grange. How are you, my friend?
I'm wonderful. This is interesting to hear that that's your internet son. This particular period was my absolute awakening because I'm older than both of you. And the Stones, the Stones and the Beatles got me into music in '63. And then when the Stones started this phase, it was when I was moving to London. It was like this was literally matching my step. Well, I was matching their steps in a humble way. It was fantastic.
Yeah, that's why I was very pleased you could join us today, mate, because you were on the scene in London during that fervent period. And if you think of all the acts that were in London at that time, Hendrix, Cream, the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, the whole scene was just so vibrant, and all that jostling for position of who was the leader of that scene, you know. And the Stones were coming into their own in this era. So
I've mentioned before on some of your other channels and programs, that whole era was just bursting out. It was just everything, movies, sport, everything was into acting, and it was incredible.
Yeah, it was a bit of a Renaissance period and also a lot going on in the world, which the Stones reflected a little bit in some of the songs. But yeah, so glad to have you here, mate. I just wanted to point out that to those who may not have watched it, regular followers of the channel, the most successful video I've ever done with my friend Granny here was the one on Stackridge.
Incredible.
The Underlooked Bands episode we did on Stackridge. 1+ hours of chat about one of the most obscure but wonderful British prog rock bands of the 70s. Yeah. We've had like 12,000 views on that video.
What? Maybe it's fucking and multiplying, who knows?
Hell of an achievement. A video I fully expected to get in the normal 30 views on 10,000 plus views.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Thanks to you.
Oh, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Not me.
You and your memories of working with the band. But yeah, that one's, it's not the most successful thing in the channel. That was the live stream we did on the movie Colossus, the Forbin project, which is somewhere up around 16k views now, which is, for me, is spectacular. I mean, we just do this thing as a hobby, so to get like-minded people to watch that stuff is amazing. So check it out, anyone that's watching that hasn't seen those. But I can see that our normal crowd, the 70s rock fan crowd, is here, and I'm always so pleased to see you all. Thank you for turning out for the show, my friends. We've got Lord Thoth, the hoser, Lord Jesus by, what a hoser that man is. We have the great Vince Womack is here.
Davina
is here. We will get to it. The D Bud Martin, the wrench of wrenches, my high sticker membership member, the one and only so far, and he's received his package for being a high sticker. I'm sure he'll tell us all about it. The highest level of membership I have in the channel. So good to see you, D Bud. Thanks for being here, my friend, and doing all that great modding. Davina too is here, and she does a great job with the modding as well. Thank you. Lord Thoth does a bit of modding too. He's got a wrench. He is the mensch of wrenches as well. We have Taylor Swift is greater than Disney. Is waving turquoise persons, whatever they look like. I'll try not to miss anybody. And Chris Longfellow, good to see you, Chris. Thank you for your kind words there. We're all still above ground, so we're definitely wonderful. How did I manage to get that through copyright? I don't know. Is it the Bond? It's my Bond emoji. Courtney's going to join us later when she's trying to sign in. I definitely want to get Courtney's view on the Stones, especially as from a punk perspective.
Yeah.
And the influence that they had. If I miss anyone here, don't worry. I will catch your chats as we go. So let's set the scene. We all think of the Stones a lot these days, I think, if we think of them at all, as this kind of fossilized group of guys that do these mega tours. They still make reasonable songs here and there. I mean, some of their stuff is not bad, but they're like it's like the fossilized great grandfathers of rock. And I think, Granny, you'll appreciate this. We forget that they were once young, vital chaps.
Yeah.
Just killing it.
But even now, they defy. I mean, Jagger. I mean, he approaches it like an athlete. Behind the scenes, he's working out. When he's going to do a tour, he takes it really seriously. All the nutrition, all the bad days of the whiskey and the booze and the coke, and I'm sure that's all treasured memories.
I read a thing today.
If they can remember those days at all.
If you can remember, you weren't there. That's what they're saying.
I've heard that line about the 60s in general. If you remember it, you weren't there.
Yeah.
So I did read a comment from Mick from the 60s where he said, when he was looking back on that period, he said, they actually told us that Coke was good for you at the time.
Yeah.
And I don't mean the drink.
That's right.
We didn't really know.
But I think in their early interviews, they thought, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Oh, I can't see me doing this past 30.
That's right.
What's he now? He's 82 now or something? 83?
Yeah. Oh, God. Well, I mean, I think 82. Yeah, maybe making hell. He's not in the band anymore, but he still plays. Bill Wyman's 87. Yeah. He's going to be 87 soon.
Yeah.
Didn't Nick just have a kid not too long ago?
Bill Wyman was the biggest dog in history.
Yeah, but it's probably artificial insemination.
That's
right.
Right.
I mean, at this point,
they talk about
if it's not good for him.
They talk about Mick, but Bill Wyman was the real dog. I think.
Right.
Not bad.
But anyway, so what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about the Rolling Stones timeline for that era, some of the people involved in the band in the Beggars Banquet era. Talk about the album a little bit, and it is a fabulous album that I absolutely love. And then some of the other stuff that was going on in 1968 that they were competing against. Because it was a pretty hot time in rock. Rock was becoming rock, I think you could say.
Well, this is like I said, when we're going from being groups to bands. This is the same example, just a blossoming and a real expansion of expression, all round.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk a little bit about the Rock and Roll Circus and then the Hyde Park thing and Brian Jones, some of that stuff. Can't play a great deal of music, but we can play. I have some great Keith Richards interview clips about Beggars Banquet. Very revealing, some of the stuff about recording. Keith was coming into his own a lot. Musically, was beginning to dominate the band because Brian had withdrawn from a lot of stuff. So we'll talk about that a bit and just a few other bits and pieces here and there. So I was going to kick it off with this, of course.
Yeah.
Let's look at this good-looking guy back in the day,
1968.
Mr. Alan Granny Grange,
That's
about
right.
to head to London for to become the debauched rocker.
Yeah.
Roadie.
Yeah, that was 68.
Yeah. Hail Tree Goblin. Good to see you. So I just thought I'd throw that one up there for old time's sake. So let's take a look at. So this is the center gatefold for Beggars Banquet. We'll start with some stats of Beggars Banquet, then we'll go into the Stones in general. Damn dirty hippies. Great artwork, and I've noticed it's Beggars Banquet without an apostrophe. So Beggars.
See the
Banquet.
grammar school here. This grammar school boy hadn't noticed that, but you're right.
Yeah, there's no apostrophe, so the Beggars don't own the banquet.
There you go.
I guess.
Which is a bit of interesting touch.
And it's not apostrophe on the end to make it plural, so it's sort of non-specific.
Yeah, so it's only one banquet. There's not multiple banquets.
My question is, what are they going to do with the goat?
Well, I think well, there's some interesting symbology in this photograph, I believe.
Yeah.
And the package itself, we were going to talk about that a little bit as well. The cover, or the cover that wasn't, and some of the stuff around that. But yeah, it's interesting. This is the cover of the album that didn't get used.
Yeah, I can see why.
Yes, initially it didn't get used, but it was eventually put on the subsequent reissues. The record company objected to this for some reason for quite some time, long enough that the band gave in and allowed them to release it with a different cover. Because they actually recorded the album between March and July 1968 in Olympic Sound Studios in London and some Sunset Sound in LA, produced by Jimmy Miller, who we'll talk about a bit more as well. First Stones album he produced, American producer. Really changed their sound, I think. But it wasn't released until 6th of December 68, largely because they were arguing about the cover. This has got some of the old time ones like Here I Sit, Broken Hearted, Came to, and Only Farted, you know.
Yep.
And I think I see, Granny, your phone number up on the wall here.
I just think I can make that out too, yeah. Yeah.
So they ended up with this one. This is what the record company went for initially. So, but yeah, released 6th of September 68, many months after it was recorded. Not necessarily the biggest charting album they ever had. It reached number 3 in the UK album charts, number 5 in the USA, top 5 in Canada, Australia, and European countries. And very unusual, or not maybe as unusual in those days, it wasn't really a singles-led album. So Street Fighting Man was released as a single. It made 21 in the UK, 48 in the USA, and Sympathy for the Devil, for many reasons, wasn't even released as a single in the US or the UK. So a very limited release. But it wasn't so much the chart success, and it's become a very well-known and well-selling album over the decades. It was more the goat's getting a bit close to Keitha. It was more the cultural impact and the significance of the change in the Stones' music we're going to talk about.
Yeah, well, they sort of started that with Painted Black. They started getting into darker material, and that was unusual too. I think that's before Jimmy Miller, but that was pretty groundbreaking too. Yeah,
they'd started to dabble in different rock, a slightly harder rock sound already. I think for me, in those tracks, even like Paint It Black and Under My Thumb and things, you could still hear the influence of Brian Jones, even though he wasn't writing. He played a lot of the different instruments. By this time, by Beggars Banquet time, he was very little involved. So it becomes more of a Keith and Mick album with a lot more rock guitar as a result. But looking at the timeline of the Stones in this period, I find quite interesting. So December 67, they released their Satanic Majesty's Request. So basically the last gasp of the Flower Power era. And the Stones doing their psychedelic Flower Power thing, probably not their best remembered album. And I think they kind of pretty quickly decided they want to ditch that whole thing because Summer of Love was over anyway. Mm-hmm. So I do love that. I do love that album as well. I mean, She's a Rainbow is one of their all-time best tracks, and that's on there. But basically a completely different sound from what was about to come. And I think based on that, they actually were at the time after that, they took a break. They've been touring constantly. They took a break. They did their Let's Go to Morocco and Get Stoned thing.
Yeah.
Steal each other's girlfriends. And then regrouped in March, between March and July in 68, record Beggars Banquet. Luckily, some of the clips you saw there, the Sympathy for the Devil, were filmed by Jean-Luc Godard in 35mm color film. So you get those wonderful scenes of them recording that track in the studio. I don't know if there's any other footage of them, but that song did get that great, beautiful coverage. I love when it pans over Keith with the bass.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of smiling.
I've never seen that footage before, and it's really high quality.
Yeah, it was a Jean-Luc Godard film about the Stones and about Sympathy for the Devil and about the political movements in Europe at the time. And he used that song as one of the centerpieces of it. And it's all on YouTube if you want to watch it. It's a great video. What's particularly great is Keith played bass on Sympathy for the Devil. Bill didn't play the bass, it was Keith, and you see him playing it in some of those clips, and he's brilliant. He's a brilliant bass player, absolutely phenomenal. So that was a lot of fun. That May 68, coming out of the sessions, released Jumpin Jack Flash, single only, not in an album, and that signposted the new sound they were going for, which was a hard rock, swaggering, slightly sleazy, dirty, gritty rock and roll sound. A milestone single. I was pretty young at the time, but I do recall it being on the radio a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it got a lot of exposure.
Yeah, I wouldn't have remembered. I mean, I'm not no savant. I was only 5. So, but there were certain songs were played all the time. Penny Lane, I remember. I distinctly remember listening to that on my mother's radio in the kitchen, and Jumpin Jack Flash, and I'd be, what's that? What's that? You know, It wasn't until Brown Sugar I really understood what the Stones were and started really listening to them. And I was a few years on, but so Jumpin Jack Flash was a huge thing. Yeah, out of the same sessions, still a very important track for them today. And I think I listened to a lot of this stuff this week, and you forget because they've been around so long just how good they were in that era. You know, we've become kind of used to them. Well, Stones are 80, they're still going, you know.
Yeah, you have to kind of put yourself back in time because we're so used to now all the technology is really caught getting every sound you want. Back then, you'd go into recording studios and it was very limited. And I think the amplifiers were beefier and they were getting that dirty sound, whereas before all the engineers would try to clean it up.
Yeah.
So the 60s was that another part of that process was like getting that sound that they wanted that wasn't perfect, but was exactly what they wanted. So,
but however they arrived at it, and I think Jimmy Miller, the producer, was a big part of it. They came up with this much more hard rock sound, and for me, Jumpin Jack Flash sets the template for hard rock for years to come for bands. I think I've got a tiny little compilation of that stuff. Yeah, I mean, that's just a little taste of that. It is when you listen to it closely, it's a very impressive song.
yeah.
Perhaps overplayed over the decades, but when you really go back and hear it, you think, well, that was really something, you know?
I always like that thing in the back. Sorry, Brian. In the background, there's kind of like almost like bell ringing. I'm not sure what instrument it is. It's beautiful.
Could be. I know that Jimmy Miller played a lot of cowbell on these songs, as well as being the producer. He got out there and he was hitting the cowbell on some of them. More cowbell.
Yeah.
And that song, maybe not on that at that time, but 2 or 3 years later, was a huge part of my musical education. So, you know, it was like because my older brother and sister had these records.
Hmm.
I was like, okay, I'm going to put this. Oh my God, what is this? This is a kid that was into the Monkees, and it's so dirty and sleazy and aggressive and adult. It's like, oh wow, this is something else. That groove they invented, I think, is something else.
Yeah.
I did want to play an interview with Keith where he talks about this particular track.
The first record with Jimmy Miller, who was a dream to work with, especially in those early days. Also, I'd been resting up for a bit after working on the road for most of the '60s non-stop and Satanic Majesties, and was really almost done semi-comatose, sort of, do we really have to make an album? Yeah, what's happening now? So it was like a bit of a revitalization. I got interested in recording again.
Yeah, so they'd had a break, got back in the studio, and one of the first things that came out was a single, and it was their first collaboration with Jimmy Miller, which we'll talk a little more about later. But just to go back to the timeline, that single came out in 1968, number one hit single in Britain, in America, and around the world. May the 12th, 1968, they performed that song live for the first time at the New Musical Express Poll Winners concert for 1968. There is no audio footage of that performance. It's a sad, sad thing, because it was Brian's last public performance with the band.
Yeah.
Apart from invited audience stuff later, like Rock and Roll Circus, that was the last paid public performance. These new musical Pole Express things, I didn't even know they were still going in '68, but they were a big deal. Granny.
Well, yeah, I wasn't too tuned into that. I was into going to the clubs. That's before I think that might be a little bit before my time. I was still up in Hartlepool. And there's a funny, on that timeline, this is a funny little quirky thing. I don't want to make this show all about me, man. But this was really like my time. Because the 8th of December was the last day I actually went train spotting. I hitchhiked over to the west side of England and was taking pictures of steam trains. And then came back and got really into being a roadie, quit my job. So I almost matched those dates. So it's kind of funny to see it up there. So the Stones represented those all. I mean, it was like, we loved the Beatles and all of that. But the Stones, when 68, 69, they started like chugging it and really something meaningful. We're all turned on by it.
Yeah, I think just before we get into that, I'd like to thank Stephen Jules Rubin for becoming a subscriber, and welcome to the channel, Stephen. And tough to choose between Beggars, Bleed, Exile, and Goat's Head Soup, and love the Majesties more than most people. I do like Satanic Majesties, but it was a very different sound. And I think the Stones decided to go back to the more stripped down American influenced blues and rock.
Yeah.
But also created a
There's
new.
something to be said for that too, of bands doing something different and seeing what happens and seeing how they like it and seeing how the fans like it. And usually, what happens is exactly that. They go back to the sound that made them famous. Yeah,
and they went back, but they then took it forward as well, which was the weird thing. They hardened it up. They made it tougher. Keith was becoming the human riff.
Yeah.
The opening riffs of Stone songs are always so great.
Yeah. I mean, you'd go out for the night and you'd maybe go to a pub before you start the night, and you'd have the jukebox, Jumpin Jack Flash. What a way to start the night.
Yeah.
It was just energy. Actually, 20, 21 years old, that was it. Boom.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it was kind of like that.
See why Keith Richards and the Stones essentially became like the inspiration for hard rock.
Absolutely.
The 70s.
Well, they were the premier. They for me, they were this album, Beggars Banquet, and the ones that came after set that template for what hard rock is. And still to this day, there's bands try to sound like that.
Yeah.
It's not metal, but hard rock, just American-based, blues-based hard rock.
Yeah, you can hear a lot of AC/DC in here, a lot of early Motorhead, a lot of all of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll definitely get into that for sure. But there's a poll in the chat, by the way, for I picked 4. You can only pick 4 albums. So I picked the 4 albums in a row they made from Beggars. You can pick your favorite. We'll see how the crowd reacts, what their favorite is, and then I can tell them they're all wrong. So,
Yeah.
just kidding. So back to the timeline. May 21st, 68, Brian Jones was arrested for the second time for pot possession. First time, of course, was I think that was back in the notorious Redlands raid, where Mick, Keith, and Brian were all arrested. And that led to, in 67, all sorts of court shenanigans. They were almost jailed for months or years until the outrage was enough to intervene in that. But this stuff started to dog Brian particularly. And then May 24th, Mick and Marianne Faithfull, his girlfriend at the time, were busted for possession too. So the authorities were starting to go after these guys because they were a threat, especially as they were making records that could be seen as political. Street Fighting Man, Sympathy. 6th of December 68 released Beggars Banquet. Then 11th December 12th, they filmed the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, which didn't get released for like 40 years after because they weren't too happy with their performance. We're going to take a look at some pictures from that later, though, and there's the odd clip. But June 69, the Stones fired Brian Jones, who was in a hell of a state by that time. And then on the 3rd of July, he died at the age of 27, strangely enough, the 27 Club. 5th of July, 69, they did the Stones in the Park gig, which you were at, Granny.
Well, no, I didn't bother going. I think I had a little bit of a suspicion about because I kind of liked Brian Jones's musical input, but I also loved the new hard sound. But I thought there was some skullduggery. I was always a bit, there's something going on there. They're doing a gig without Brian. Not that I was being very highbrow, but I probably was in between a couple of Carlsberg special brews in the pub and thought, nah. Mal went.
Oh, Mal was there, yeah.
Yeah, it was so far. It was about 3 miles on the central line,
3 whole miles.
So 3 miles. I just didn't bother going.
People see, that shows you a very British attitude. People go 300 miles to a gig and think nothing of it in the US.
But the funny thing was, I wasn't unless I was working with a band, I didn't go to a lot of concerts. All over the years, I've seen a few things, but I tended to be interested in other stuff. I loved the scene and I loved the music, but I wasn't big on the concerts. Can't explain it.
Well, you were working.
If you had a night off, you might, you could go on a gig with your friends. So I think I probably missed a lot of good concerts. So.
Not to worry, mate. But that Hyde Park gig marked the first outing of Mick Taylor. And it's a shame nobody bothered to tune their guitars for that one. But
yeah, I was also a little disappointed because they were very ramshackle. I'm not that I'm any purist, but I was into stuff like Jeff Beck and all that. And the Stones just seemed sloppy for those on stage for a couple of years. They had a couple of live albums, then they get your yah-yahs out. They just seem sloppy. But
I don't know if Stephen, they were pretty sloppy, which is why it's not one I try to watch too often. But Stephen's saying, we know who you mean by Mal from Brother Otis Gibbs' channel.
Oh, okay.
Is that the same Mal?
I don't know.
Is it our Mal? Our buddy Mal?
I don't know Otis Gibbs, I'm afraid.
I'm not sure. And
look at D. Bud Martin, he's plugging us. We'll have to get some new content.
We'll have to get some new Rowdies content. Yeah. July 69, Honky Tonk Women released.
Yeah.
And then November 69, Let It Bleed. So, which Brian Jones had done a couple of things on before he died, but really it's Mick Taylor onwards. So.
Yeah.
So that was their timeline of the band. I mean, there's obviously tons of other stuff happened in that era, but who were these guys? I mean, a lot of people now, younger people know the Stones as making Keith and Ronnie Wood, but slightly different back in the day. And they weren't afraid to sleep together.
Mm-hmm.
So here they are outstanding in their field.
Yeah. Bada boom.
Bada boom. So you had, this is a great picture.
Yeah.
So this was the lineup. The classic lineup, some may say. not pictured is Ian Stewart, who did a lot of their piano work, and there was the road manager.
I never understood how they thought he wasn't good looking enough, but they kept Bill Wyman.
I know. I don't know if it's Mal. I think it's a different guy, Stephen. We have a good friend called Mal, who's a legendary road manager, a friend of Granny's. Is Mal doing that?
But Mal's legendary for his package, at least.
But Mal, yeah, we'll have to look into that, Stephen. You've got me intrigued now. We've done a lot of streams with we've done a lot of streams with Mal Evans and is it Mal Evans? No, he was with the Beatles.
Yeah.
Our friend Mal, Pink Floyd and Genesis, Peter Gabriel, road manager.
Yeah.
Anyway, so at the time, obviously Mick Jagger, him and Keith writing all the songs, wrote all but one on Beggars Banquet. There was one blues standard. Renaissance man, Mick, living in Chester Square in London, I think at the time, with Marianne Faithfull. Marianne Faithfull, of course, who John Lennon famously wrote "And Your Bird Can Sing" about. You think you've seen Seven Wonders and your bird can sing. It was basically a dig at Mick, his friend.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
It was about Mick Jagger. Like, you think you're hot shit. I'm still John Lennon. You know?
Right.
So he was at the time becoming the Renaissance man, reading a lot of poetry, philosophy, being very social, with hobnobbing like a good middle class boy with the hoi polloi, hanging out with Robert Fraser in art galleries and taking a lot of things that he shouldn't take, or he probably doesn't take now.
We all did.
Indeed, he was into theatre and hanging out. So he was very much in that social scene in London. Bit of a sponge for that stuff. And a lot of it did work its way into his lyrics. Mick played a lot of stuff on the albums. He played a lot of guitar. He never got credited for it, but he played a lot of guitars as well. Harp, great harp player.
Yeah.
Like is it No Expectations? I think he plays or am I getting is it No Prodigal Son? He plays a fantastic harp on it. And such a performer. I mean, even today, I don't know how he does it. I have trouble getting up in the morning. I'm 20 years younger than him.
Like I say, he approaches it like an athlete. I mean, seriously. Yeah.
Like D-Bud, the Rattles also wrote for the Stones. The song for the Stones was rubbish.
That's great.
That referencing the fact that the Stones tried to live down today, that their first ever hit single was written for them by the Beatles, "I Want to Be Your Man."
I know.
Which they've tried to live down ever since. Keith, of course, was also coming into his own. Brian, of course, it was Brian's band initially. They kind of stole his band from him over the years, but there's a lot of good reasons for that, as Keith would get into.
We know they were in their 20s. You're evolving.
Yeah.
You know, you can't expect things to stay the same. You're in your 20s. By the time you're 30, you're a different person.
Well, I don't want to get too into the personal stuff, but Brian could be difficult, apparently, and also didn't treat Anita Pallenberg very well, and she ended up with Keith.
Yeah.
So I guess if your girlfriend ends up with your bandmate, that's not a good thing. It's perhaps seen as...
sounds like normal behavior to us, lad.
That's right. But Keith was really coming into his own here. He played virtually all the guitars on this, and even bass on a couple of tracks like Street Fighting Man and Sympathy for the Devil. He had a lot of ideas. He was trying different ways to get different sounds, but coming up with these great riffs. Also, open tune. He was tuning his guitar differently, and I've actually tuned my guitar to the way he does it, which means you can actually play a lot of chords, basic chords, just with one finger, and then do the fancy stuff like that instead of the open tuning where you're basically holding the whole hand down. So playing Brown Sugar becomes dead easy if you do it the way he does. So Keith was a huge part of this album, coming up with some great licks, some really dirty guitar work on Stray Cat Blues, Parachute Woman.
Yeah.
Lovely stuff. Brian was still in the band, but he wasn't really turning up for sessions, which was part of the problem.
I think this isn't this the photograph that the National Health Service in England used to promote better dental health?
Better dental health. Yeah. Also, This is one for the Whovians. Mick Jagger was the early template for Tom Baker's Doctor Who.
Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah. So Brian was struggling a bit by this time. Oh yeah, I mean, if we mentioned the Anita Pallenberg thing. She used to be with Brian, ended up with Keith. Suffering from a lot of drug use. Physiologically, he wasn't handling that stuff very well. Definitely not in Keith's league. Lost his significance in the band because he didn't write. That was one of his big problems. He didn't write. Kit was busted again. Faced a long jail term because of the second bus, couldn't get a US visa to tour the US. That was a big problem.
Yeah.
Psychiatrists managed to keep him out of jail by pleading mental health issues after the second drug bust. But by this time, this is early 68, he didn't turn up for sessions. And when he did turn up, generally speaking, he'd like to be going to do Stray Cat Blues, he'd turn up with a sitar.
Mm-hmm.
So Jimmy Miller would put him in a soundproof room and let him play, but never really recorded anything, you know. Did play a great slide on No Expectations, though. Brilliant slide guitar.
Love it.
And that was his forte, was coming into the band with, and play. He could play, Keith said Brian could go into a studio, pick up any instrument, even if he'd never held it before in his life, and in 20 minutes he could master it. So,
and that's important for a band, especially in this time where music is evolving so rapidly and they're doing different stuff with technology and new instruments and all that. But, you know, like you said, when he starts becoming a problem for the band, even on an administrative or managerial level, then that's it.
And guys in their late 20s all fighting over women and fighting over supremacy in the band. And, you know,
and once you get into, this guy can't get a visa to go to a place like the US for a tour, that becomes a major issue.
Absolutely.
And you can hear the change in sound between pre-Brian Jones era and post-Brian Jones. Things like Under My Thumb with the marimbas, Paint It Black, the sitar.
Yeah,
that's
magic.
all Brian. Brian added all that stuff.
And it's still some of my favorite stuff from them.
Yeah. Once he left the band, it moved into a more of a hard rock arena, still with some great musicianship, but not quite the same thing. It's not better or worse, but just not the same. So this was pretty much his swan song in terms of recording. But obviously they still had Charlie Watts, a jazz drummer who found himself in the world's biggest rock and roll band, which was stylish, very stylish guy, very reserved. Had his only daughter in 1968, his only child, I think, with his longtime wife, Shirley Ann. A car collector. He collected cars, never had a driver's license. So he said he didn't feel the need to drive them. He just liked to look at them.
Yeah, let somebody else drive them. Yeah.
But what a great drummer. I mean, never a guy with... You'll never see Charlie Watts behind a double bass drum, enormous kit. Just precision jazz drummer. Lots of great fills, but no frills.
Yeah.
Absolute backbone of the band. Backbone.
Very distinctive on some of the songs. You know, that Honky Tonk Women, that's a very unusual drum beats. I'm not technical. I can never describe it, but that's very unusual.
Yeah, he was only slightly stoned, as Lord says. Bill Wyman, stoic bass player. Sometimes it was actually hard to tell if he was awake. Never moved, never said anything, never smiled hardly. Just stood there. Brilliant bass player, but that was his thing. And I actually I've seen him with the Stones a couple of times, but I went to see him with his Rhythm Kings band about 20 years ago, expecting him to play a more leading role. No, he just stood at the back and played, and everybody else did stuff. So.
Yeah, he was very active outside of the Stones too. My younger brother's in a band in Britain called the Blue Bishops, kind of R&B blues band, and Bill Wyman's been involved with him, and my brother Jeffrey's done a few projects with him. So been very active outside of the Stones.
Yeah, he had a lot of fingers on a lot of pies at restaurants. He did some cartoon stuff, I think, even at some times. He was a bit of an artist. Had a pub. But yeah, he's had lots of different musical things since, and he even did something. He was on that Hackney album that 2023 that Stones did.
Right, he did a few bits on there.
I do remember the first tour he didn't do with them when somebody asked the Stones, well, where's Bill? And Mick said, oh, he's out parking cars in the car park. And then I wanted to shout out Nicky Hopkins.
Yeah.
Who played a lot of the piano and mellotron and stuff on the album. Nicky Hopkins, legendary session player.
Yeah.
Probably easier to say who he didn't work with in that era, but the Beatles, the Stones, the Kinks, the Who, band after band, you'll hear Nicky Hopkins playing piano. I don't know if you ever worked with him, Granny. And
I never met him, no, but he was a legendary, wasn't he?
Total.
Yeah.
What's a mellotron? Did I pronounce mellotron incorrectly? Is it a mellotron?
It should be two L's. Should be two L's.
Look, Steve, Canadian Spider-Man, I wrote the book on mellotrons, okay? In fact, speaking of books, I have a clip.
What can you learn from books?
Dad, Steve, right, there's no books.
Books.
Yeah. Had to play that one right now. So yeah, Nicky Hopkins, you'll see him the piano on Sympathy for the Devil, very distinctive. Top session man. Also working on this, there was Glyn Johns, engineer and producer. You see him with Mick here. Famous engineer and producer, still alive to this day, unlike many of the people in this era. Like Hopkins, he worked with the cream of the crop. The Beatles, the Stones, the Who, Led Zeppelin. Extremely well-respected engineer and producer. So he engineered this album. The producer was a guy called Jimmy Miller, who's an American producer. Came over to Britain because he didn't really like working in America. He said, basically they were all they would ask was, what was your last hit and how much money did it make? He was more interested in how can I make great records, So I think he'd worked with The Move. He came over, he did a little bit of work with Traffic and The Move.
Spooky Tooth.
I
was reading up on him.
Yeah, this was the first Stones album he did. And then he went on to do the next 4.
He's a perfect fit. He was anti-establishment too, so it's perfect fit.
And he just, for whatever reason, he changed the sound, and it was for the better. And much more American rock, blues, and country sound. It's an American, Beggars Banquet's a very American sounding album for a quintessentially British band. If you listen to it, there's a lot of great rootsy blues, rootsy rock, country stuff. Obviously, the band knew all that, but as a producer, he knew how to bring that out in them. His dad, here's a bit of trivia for you. Jimmy Miller's dad, Bill, was the guy who booked Elvis into the International Hotel in Vegas for his 1969 return to live performance.
Yep.
Because his dad was a big promoter in Vegas. So that's a neat piece of trivia. I stayed in that hotel earlier this year.
Did you?
Elvis was not in the building. He had left.
Yeah.
But yeah, he produced some great stuff for Traffic, Blind Faith, The Move. For me, he produced all of these golden era Stones albums. So Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street. But Pope,
yes,
do you know which albums he produced a few years later that you and I love?
Not offhand, no.
Motorhead's Bomber and Overkill.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Well, yeah, those are certainly two of my favorites.
He went on to produce Motorhead amongst other later bands in the 70s.
And I can kind of hear the similarities.
Great rock and roll producer, yeah.
Yeah, I can kind of hear the similarities with their early stuff.
So there's a connection. There's your connection between the Stones and Motorhead right there.
There you go.
He died, sadly, at the age of 52 in 1994. Otherwise, who knows what he could have gone on to continue to achieve. I just wanted to show something. If you want to know more about Jimmy Miller, indeed there's a whole load of great stuff about the Stones in this era. I'm going to plug another channel, not that they know anything about me, but it's a channel called Yesterday's Papers. This is the Jimmy Miller interviews about how they made Beggars Banquet. Excellent stuff, very informative. I watch this channel all the time. This is the channel I wish I could grow up to be. They make such great stuff about 60s and 70s music. So I'm going to give them a plug. They do this series of cool British singles released in each month. They're working their way through the 60s. I've learned so much stuff and heard stuff I would never have heard before. So there's some great stuff on the Stones. You can see the some of it up there.
All right.
So check out Yesterday's Papers. I'm going to just put hey, they know nothing about me, but I like them. So I'm just plugging them in the. I've stuck the link in there. Great channel, a lot of fun. I could watch them for days on end. Okay, commercial time over. So Jimmy Miller, yeah, great guy, great producer. Yeah, so this is actually this new Musical Express performance that they did in '68. Brian's last publicly paid appearance with them. They did Jumpin' Jack Flash for the first time. There are some 8mm silent clips of it, but for some reason, never recorded. Which is weird because the earlier NME Pole Winners concerts were. That's where you get to see a lot of Beatles, Stones, Hollies, other clips.
That's always funny from this period is it seems to be almost random as to what they recorded and filmed and what just didn't.
Yeah. And yet it would have been a great one to see that first time performance of Jumpin' Jack Flash. Christian Delorme has celebrated 1 month of membership at the groupie level. Thank you, Christian, for being a member. Memberships really do help support this old unemployed bum that I am. And helps keep this channel going because nothing, it's on a shoestring. Hell, if I could afford shoestrings, that would be good.
Luxury.
So I'm going to play a little clip for Christian. Let's try this.
You ignorant slut.
That's great. Him and Jimmy Fallon work well together.
That was a good one. That's Mick playing Keith and Mike Myers playing Mick.
Was it Mike Myers? Okay. Jimmy Fallon does a thing where he does Mick's rooster thing. Have you seen that clip? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few good Mick ones like that, but that one's one of my favorites. You ignorant slut.
Yeah.
Talk English, Mick. Speak English. No, speak English, Keith. Anyway, bit of a run through of the people, the main people involved. There were other musicians involved, especially in Sympathy with the Devil, where just about everybody was hitting bongos or something. But there was an awful lot of I want to go back to the cover. Controversy about the cover. It was actually a guy called Barry Feinstein photographed it. And he was a legendary Hollywood photographer and celebrity friend of people like Steve McQueen, a whole bunch of other guys. I've looked at a few of them. He took some incredible pictures, which I think we've all seen of Hollywood in that era. But he also went on to do dozens, if not hundreds, of album covers, including Bob Dylan, George Harrison, Eric Clapton, the Average White Band cover.
His name sounds familiar, yeah.
Might have heard of those guys once or twice.
That's right, yeah. So he did that AWB cover with the drawing one.
Which one?
The drawing of the woman with the bum.
He did that? Okay.
Yeah. He also did some of my favorites, like Graham Parsons' albums and the Flying Burrito Brothers albums and stuff. So he became a prolific rock photographer, even though he'd kind of grown up in the Hollywood side of things. So
interesting. Yeah.
So great cover, great concept. As we said, the record company didn't like it too much. And then they moved to this wedding invitation one.
It's like a little gilt-edged card.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just not the same, though.
I know.
You know, but Keith did have something to say about the cover, the whole cover thing. So let me just call that up on the screen. Oh, yeah, this is it. Show on stream. There we go.
To us, it was like, what a cheek, you know. Here we go, give them a great record, and they're going to make a fuss about a bit of graffiti, you know. I mean, people get, you know, gotten away with far worse, you know, before or after. It was just like, once more, you know, the guys that run the whole show, the ones that hold the purse strings, you know, the record companies, etc., that just wanting to put their boot in, you know, like for no real reason. I mean, so when we said, well, you know, we've gone ahead and made this, you know, and we're very happy and proud with this record, and they want to screw us up about the package to put it in. So, and we said, it just dug in our heels for a while, but then after a bit,
I think that was Mick.
No, I'm pretty sure it was Keith.
He
'Cause
said
the whole-
etc. I've never heard Keith use the word etc.
He must have meant it in a different way.
I don't know. That sounded like Mick to me, but anyway.
Yeah, it was a BBC interview done in 71 or 72 where it was all, they were interviewing Keith for stuff. But they have actually, before Keith started talking like this, they actually did sound a little bit similar, both being good Kent grammar school boys.
Oh, yeah. Well, was Keith a grammar school boy?
He was.
Was he? Okay.
He was.
Like myself.
Indeed. So, yeah, I mean, it's quite sad that in the end they gave up. Like this, we've got to get the record out, you know.
Yeah.
The record company wasn't going to budge, and they still didn't have the power.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they didn't quite have the power yet, but so it was Keith, yeah. And Vince was asking, did I say flying burritos? I did, and I'm not talking about Mexican Iron Man. I was talking about the marvelous band that I love deeply, the Flying Burrito Brothers, and Graham Parsons, who I'm a huge fan of both of those acts. So one day I'll be doing a stream about them. The burritos were magnificent. Forget your Eagles. The burritos were where it was at for country rock.
Yeah. Poco was similar. Poco
yeah.
were pretty good.
Poco were similar too. Hang on. So let's talk a little bit about some of the records and then Beggars Banquet itself and that sound of that record. I hope everybody in the chat's enjoying this rather academic description of this stuff.
Have you got an original album cover, Brian?
Of
Satanic Majesties?
I don't have it on vinyl.
Because I think the original cover was like all kaleidoscopic plastic on the front.
Yeah, I've never had that vinyl cover.
No.
My initial ownership of this album was on a cassette I recorded off my older sister's album.
That's cheating.
And now I've got it in digital.
Piracy.
Most of my early shit was on cassettes. I couldn't afford to buy albums.
Right.
So Satanic Majesties, which was kind of I hesitate to say Sgt. Pepper-ish, but you kind of got to think it was somewhat influenced.
Totally.
It was the Stones' Summer of Love response, plus the single We Love You. Great album, and as Stephen was saying in the chat, a brilliant album. Not as Stonesy, though, as many. And I think they kind of got tired of that thing. And the world had moved on. Flower Power was gone. It was the Summer of Revolution coming up. Things were getting harder. So they moved on from that. Still an interesting experiment, though. As I say, the track She's a Rainbow is in my top 10 Stones songs of all time. So 2000 Light Years from Home, another standard that gets played a lot today. So March May 68, the fruits of their first new sound, Jumpin Jack Flash, on the London label. Photographed by David Bailey, this single.
Ah,
Oh, famous. Still around as well, David Bailey, famous photographer. Then we get to Beggars Banquet. So I'll take a quick run through the tracks. But I mean, what you had in here in terms of the sound was there was a lot of blues on here. So went back to their blues roots, but a lot more darker and grittier in many places, a more provocative themes lyrically. A lot of country as well, a little bit of folk. But
I always like Dear Doctor. The accent,
Doctor.
his accent on that is brilliant.
And Mick's vocals are incredible. I mean, again, we're so used to him, we forget just how good a vocalist he was. And writing those lyrics is a way of expressing them. They draw it all out now, you know. I went down to the doctor, you know.
Doctor.
And yet he would sing in an American accent, but sometimes he would do that drawl, that Cockney drawl. It was a weird thing. Great singer, great lyricist. I might take a look at some of these lyrics if we've got time on this album.
Yeah.
So you had great combinations of rock, blues, country, and folk. Really, for me, this album propelled them into the hard rock, the greatest rock band in the world. I know it's a title. Nobody asks for that title. But they assumed the mantle with this album. Nobody else sounded like this, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Sympathy for the Devil, Street Fighting Man, Stray Cat Blues, Parachute Woman. There's a lot of hard rock and hard blues on here. Very gritty. So it's a new sound with Jimmy Miller producing, set a template. You had revolutionary politics being talked about, though. Street Fighting Man, which according to Keith, was about the Grosvenor Square riots.
Right.
I don't recall, but I guess it was against the American embassy there at the time of the Vietnam War.
Well, there'd been riots in the States and in Paris within the previous year too. So reflection of the times, you know.
Yeah, and then the Democratic Convention in Chicago and all that. Right. So there was a lot of strife, and Street Fighting Man was about that. Sympathy for the Devil was also a commentary. But what a well-written song from the point of view of the devil.
Yeah.
Just superbly written lyric and delivered by Keith, Mick, with such conviction. There's actually there's two versions of it out there at least. There's but the version we all know and love was the sort of samba one with the heavy bass and just Keith's lead guitar. There is another one out there with more guitars in it, which I quite like too, but they went with the one that was largely bass and percussion driven. You've got a lot of sex.
Yeah.
A lot of sex. Parachute Woman. Basically wants her to land on him.
Land on him.
Stray Cat Blues, which is dirty, gritty, sexy, whatever. You know the Stray Cat is Mick, of course. Celebrations of working class things like Factory Girl and Salt of the Earth, which is kind of like an anthem. And these are tracks that are still played. They still play today at various gigs.
Salt of the Earth is a good song.
It's a great song. Keith taking the first verse as well, and then Mick taking over on the vocals. You got traditional blues and country themes, like lost, loneliness, redemption, humor about marriage, which I think is Dear Doctor's theme. Like, thank God she's gone. I don't have to get married. No Expectations, Prodigal Son, which is the only cover in the album. Reverend, was it Reverend Watkins? Al Watkins, an old blues standard, which is a great lyric and brilliantly delivered. Keith's guitar playing is just phenomenal.
And I think when the Stones covered an old blues song, they gave credit to the original artist. Usually,
they did.
Not like some bands.
Yeah, and Jigsaw Puzzle, which has kind of got a surreal feel to it. It's one of the more surreal ones. But people might, I think your casual singles buyer would look at this and go, well, there's no singles on here. I've heard of Sympathy for the Devil, Street Fighting Man. But tracks like, I mean, every track's a banger for me.
Yeah.
But Salt of the Earth is still something they played over the years. Factory Girl, Stray Cat Blues. Every track on this is brilliant, and it set a template for what was to come, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, but thematically, they're covering a lot of ground, particularly with the zeitgeist stuff of Sympathy for the Devil and Street Fighting Man. In fact, let's call those lyrics up. Hope everybody's okay with me doing that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna bore you all. Street Fighting Man lyrics might be hard to see. I just love some of the lines in this. It just what can a poor boy do except to sing for a rock and roll band?
The time is right for a palace revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do love the dancing in the street ripoff though, or tribute. Summer's here and the time is right for.
That's right,
fighting
Martha and
in
the Vandellas.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So largely Mick written lyrics, but it's. I think we rightly praise the Beatles for their songwriting and lyrical songwriting, but this is of the equal of any of that, in my opinion. It's, especially when it's then allied to that gritty, guitar-driven with a fantastic drumming by Charlie, propelling it forward. It's possibly one of the. It's a perfect rock song.
You know, when you see the lyrics written out, you get the emphasis. Like, I'll shout and scream, I'll kill the king, I'll rail at all his servants. I mean, that's threatening.
Yeah.
When you hear it in the song, you go, yeah, it's great, but no, not onto the next line. But when you read it, that's provocative.
I know, and mentioning the words like king or palace revolution in a monarchy it was controversial. Keith's got a little bit to say about the guitar sound in this one. I'm just going to play this. He came up with an interesting way of doing the guitars on it. If it's the one I'm thinking of. There we go.
It was the right in Grosvenor Square. It was the big one outside the American embassy. That was what it was about. On there is the bass, which I overdubbed afterwards. Otherwise, all those guitars they're just acoustics, you know, and it's all acoustic instruments except for an overdubbed electric bass. I was using the best qualities that you can get rhythmically out of an acoustic guitar, and I was really using one of the first cassette players, and that was really a pickup. You know, I was using it in that way as a sort of turning it into an electric guitar, but you could play acoustically, you know, and then just play it, ram the volume up, play the cassette, you know, full pelt through a little extension speaker and transfer it onto tape. So it was just a different way of turning an acoustic guitar into an electric guitar as well, trying to get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I love it.
Exactly. That's what I was saying. Like, the technology was developing. There were these sounds in their heads, but the technology wasn't there yet, and they were creating all this stuff.
Yeah, Pope, have you ever played your guitar through a cassette player and then played it through something else?
That I can't say I have because cassettes were long dead by the time I picked the guitar up. But I mean, this was a cool period in terms of that, where technology was changing a lot in terms of recording tech and stuff like that. Like multi-track recording was just becoming a thing and all that in the mid-'60s.
I do find it interesting that on an album where the Stones got back to basics in many ways with the blues and blues rock, that didn't mean they didn't stop trying to do things differently. Yeah,
well, that was always the thing with the Beatles as well, is even when they stripped down and played, like, you know, the more basic rock and roll tunes, they were still experimenting with new production techniques and new technology constantly.
Yeah. What can I do to make this different? And as you said, it's all acoustics, but it actually, he makes them gritty and electric sounding by the way he did it, playing it through a cassette and then putting that through a small.
Yeah, it's funny that, you know, in the 60s, the more produced they got, the more raw that sound got, because you were capturing a lot of the, you know, ambient and atmospheric noise rather than just the signal from the instrument itself.
Yeah,
Whereas nowadays they scrub all that out and it's a lot cleaner sound the more you produce it.
I know. I think Mick also said something about so Mick and Keith had done a lot of the production work on previous albums. And he said this time with Jimmy Miller there, he was able to go back to the other side of the glass and just think about the music and playing. And I love those shots of them where Mick's, they're all sitting around with the guitars working out Sympathy for the Devil. He didn't have to worry because he knew Miller was going to be a great producer. Doesn't mean they weren't involved, but they could rely on him. So he could go back
especially when, like me and Christian just covered ELO with Jeff Lynne being both the lead producer and the only creative force in the band. It creates this constant, almost double life where you're having to do everything on the writing side and then go produce it once everyone else is done.
It did free them up to Mick and Keith to just go in the studio and play the music and think about that. So I think you can hear that. I think Miller's production makes a big difference, and as a person, they clicked. So, but that's I love when I hear him talking about how they do that. I like to hear about how they did it.
Yeah.
We didn't just go there and stand there and play. I wanted a particular sound. How was I going to get it? Okay, I'll try this. I'll try that. Great. That's what the late 60s were all about.
That's right. It was, yeah.
Yeah, I love that stuff. So, yeah, great lyrics. And actually, I did want to say what Stephen says, Salt of the Earth should be an anthem for fixing the world still. Given that Mick and Keith were fairly middle-class boys, grammar school boys, that and Factory Girl are two very blue-collar anthems.
Yeah.
And Salt of the Earth is a real celebration of just the working man, which I've always appreciated that lyric for that reason, the celebration of that, so I agree. But looking at Sympathy for the Devil, if I can get that back on the stream, there we go. Again, maybe slightly different from Street Fighting Man, and this is a more narration from a character, and it's just I don't think there's another. Again, is there another song like this in rock? I don't know. Maybe
that's what kind of drew me to it initially. It's a very unique sound.
He was reading. Yeah, you can see Mick was reading a lot of stuff and getting into it, as Davina says. And it just. Yeah, I was around when Jesus Christ had his moment of doubt and pain, and it's all. I mean, the Kennedys. After all, it was who killed the Kennedys. After all, it was you and me.
You and me.
It's just. I rode a tank and heard a general's rank when the blitzkrieg raged and the bodies stank. Don't know why Sabaton. I've never covered this.
I think Motorhead almost exactly did with Death or Glory.
They did. Yeah. Guns N' Roses did an actual cover, I think, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Yeah. Which, it wasn't all that great. It's all right.
It's just such evocative lyrics.
And this is one of those songs that I don't think you can do a good cover of it because this is such a unique sound to them.
And Mick singing it is just incredible. I mean, Mick, we forget because he's become this not parody, but he's become today dancing about 80 on stage. This is.
I'm trying to take myself back to when it came out because I wasn't always listening to lyrics in music and stuff, and I've always been pretty lowbrow. I just like the sound of things, but this was one of those records. Is he really singing what I think he's singing? It was it was a fucking hell.
Didn't get a lot of airplay in Britain.
Yeah, I remember whoa, that's Blitzkrieg Rage, bodies stinking. Yeah, it was quite an impact.
But presenting him as a gentleman, a man of wealth and taste, it's just the whole.
That's what's fascinating about the lyricism here is this is how Satan would come at you.
Some of the worst terrorists look like businessmen.
Yeah, well, he's not going to be, the big fiery monster. He's going to be a guy in a business suit with a proposition for you.
Like Himmler.
How he's going to make all your dreams come true.
Yeah. Half of the Nazis were just like weenies,
Yeah, it's just so good.
Or bought into the lie.
Yeah, and much as I love the instrumentation, I mean, Keith plays the bass is Keith, not Bill Wyman, I don't think. He plays it brilliant. It's a fantastic bass line. and he plays that great gritty guitar, lead guitar with a
Screechy.
yeah.
And
I
my
love the bit at
favorite-
the end when he runs
And-
his fingers down.
Even for a guitar player, my favorite on this is the drum work and percussion stuff because it's got a lot of very jazzy, very offbeat percussion stuff going on,
Well,
which I find fascinating.
according to Keith, and I do have a clip I'll play. He started as and you see them rehearsing it with the guitars, acoustic guitars. He said it started as a kind of a folky thing, and it ended up as a samba. So it just kind of
I love that. I love that.
it just developed into something completely different because it just grew. The whole thing grew as they were doing. That's what this album. He said everything just kind of grew. The songs grabbed you by the tail.
And that's what kind of makes this kind of unique in a lot of ways is because, like you say, it grew organically. Like they didn't set out like, okay, we're going to do a samba and here's how it's going to go.
Yeah,
it's just like, all right, let's start with a basic riff and let's build on it until it turns into whatever it turns into.
Yeah, there was no samba. I'm just going to play this clip, but I agree with it was actually my wife that said, because I said I want to do a Stones show about the late 60s. She said, well, talk about Beggars Banquet. And I said, because a lot of people would go to Sticky Fingers or Exile on Main Street. I said, no, you're right. Beggars Banquet was the one that really kicked them into overdrive. So I'm glad we're talking. It's great. Here's Keith again talking about Sympathy.
There might have been a little bit of that, but I think more the feeling of, well, this is the way it is right now. A lot of the subject matter that you write about, it depends what's going on around you. Just read the titles and you get a feel of what 1967, 68 were like.
A song I understood had started out very differently from the way it wound up on Beggars Banquet.
Yeah, a lot of songs do that. You have to sort of follow them through and play them. It started off as virtually a sort of Dylan-esque sort of ballad, you know, and slowly it got faster and faster, and it ended up as a samba. You know, you never know. You have sometimes, it's not because you don't, I don't think you don't create songs. They're not all your creation, you know. It's, you just sort of pluck them out of the air if you're sort of around and receptive. And then you say, well, I kind of like this, and something about the song says that I'm worth the time and the trouble to sort of just keep playing me and find out, you know. And if you hang on to their tail long enough, then suddenly you go, right, there I am, I'm ready, you know. And so you kind of have to listen to the mechanics of the song all the time and be very receptive to what it's trying to tell you while you're making it.
Oh, interesting.
I do like the way he puts that, you know, the thing about hanging onto the tail and it becomes something else.
It kind of thought, hang on to that thought. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's fascinating to hear that talking about the process.
Yeah, but definitely one of the greatest rock songs of all time. And I know I'm focusing on the two songs that most people know, Sympathy and Street Fighting Man, and they endure in their set today, but they're that good for a reason. You know, maybe they became overexposed, but that's anything that lasts 60 years is going to be. There's still nothing like these songs. Having seen them live myself a couple of times, it's great stuff, and they were artists. They went from pop blues guys to be artists, significant artists in my opinion. So, but yeah, not that the rest of the album is overshadowed by any means. Listening to this again after the first time for a few months and listening to it for a few months, listening to it several times this week, I just to realize how awesome it is. I mean, No Expectations is beautiful acoustic blues number, very melancholy, great. That's the one where there's some great slide guitar from Brian Jones.
Definitely.
Dear Doctor, very humorous. Country, starting to show their country tinge. Americana, you would call it now. They were one of the first bands to do that. Yeah. A man who's relieved when his bride-to-be runs off. As I'm sure the Stones would be. They're all some of them had about 18 kids by now. So, yeah.
Unfortunately for them, sometimes their wife to be ran off with another member in the band, so they still have to deal with it.
That's right. But yeah, Parachute Woman, which is a really great live sounding gritty blues. Get stripped down, lo-fi, stripped down, rock and roll. And then lots of other bands heard that and went, oh shit, how do we sound like that? For 10 years, you get bands trying to sound like that. They had, but dirty guitar riffs from Keith. And Keith did virtually all the guitars in this. Jigsaw Puzzle.
I think a lot of the stuff you heard on this album would go on to influence bands like Black Sabbath and stuff like that going into the 70s. Like, you heard a lot of bands get harder and a lot dirtier going into, 70, 71.
A ton of bands wanted to sound like the Stones, right through even to the punk era.
That essentially was punk in an idea form, was basically take old school rock and roll, strip it down to the most basic, and then just go lo-fi production all the way.
Absolutely, yeah. But Jigsaw Puzzle, which is the kind of probably the most surreal psychedelic tinged one. It isn't really psychedelic per se, but it's got that dreamlike feeling.
It's the late 60s, so everything had that little psychedelic tinge to it.
But again, great lyrics, brilliant lyrics. And Prodigal Son, which is the cover, Robert Wilkins. I keep saying Al for some reason. It's a biblical story of redemption and stripped back acoustic playing, very bluesy, great vocal from Jagger, who sounds like a black blues player from America. Speaking of great vocalists,
yeah, right.
Courtney is here.
Courtney.
Can you actually hear me without like a bunch of background noise?
No, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Because it's a long story.
There's a bit of wind, but
yeah. Let me see if I can do something about that. Let me mute my.
There's a bit of wind, but that could just be you.
You took the words out my mouth, Brian.
Anyway, yeah.
Is that better?
It is. It sounds
now
great.
You're just going to hear my dog licking and panting.
All right.
But hi, everybody.
Hi. Thanks for joining us. Where are you?
Courtney.
I'm oh, hey, Granny, and hey, Poop, and hey, Brian. I'm in southern Colorado with car trouble.
Oh, dear.
So I managed to pull around to the back of this hotel where I get some service, and yeah.
I hope you're going to get it
I hope you get the car fixed too.
Yeah, my back lift gate in this car, the window part that has like the windshield wiper and everything, it's like an SUV. It is detached. It's hanging.
Look, we've put you in the middle of the Stones.
Yeah, she fits right in. She just fits right in.
Yeah, I know I'm at a weird
Well, hang on though, Bill's creeping closer. Yeah, Bill's creeping towards you. Watch out.
It's good to see you, lass. Yeah, we're heavily into this discussion on the Stones and Beggars Banquet and the Stones in the late 60s. I don't know if it's an album you're at all familiar with, or indeed what your feelings about the Stones are in general. And I don't mean the Stones of today. I mean the Stones.
I love the Stones, old Stones. I'm actually a bigger fan of prior to this era, and then a little bit. I mean, prior to this album and a little bit after.
Yeah.
But Under My Thumb and Mother's Little Helper are like, I don't know. My Thumb is one of my favorite songs. But on this album, they have that weird, it's not weird, but is it Prodigal Son or something?
Prodigal Son's on here, yeah.
Yeah, it's like really bluegrassy.
Deep bluesy sound, yeah.
I love the Stones. I've seen them twice. I saw them on the Voodoo Lounge tour in the early 90s, I want to say. 92, 93, 94, something like that. And then I saw them in my 20s. Again, the Pretenders opened up for them. I went to go see them and the Pretenders. So I am a fan.
Stephen Jules is waving to you. He's in.
I know, he's not far from me.
He's in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Yeah.
Hail
Stark of Iron. Good to see you, buddy.
Hey, Tony.
Tree Goblin is here.
Tree.
Hope I haven't missed anybody earlier that's joining the chat. Thank you all for being here for this. I doubt myself, believe it or not. And I always say, if I'm going to do a show talking about the Stones Beggars Banquet, how many people are going to turn up? 4 people, 5 people? I shouldn't have such little faith because you guys are always here in the panel and in the chat. So thank you. Because I'm thinking, who wants to talk about a 60-year-old album? You know.
Well, I mean, we talk about 50-year-old albums all the time.
Music is timeless. Come on.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess I shouldn't doubt it because you guys are all got great taste. So thank you everyone for being here for this discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. And I was actually thinking, so we were just talking about some of the sounds on here, like Stray Cat Blues, Parachute Woman, Stripped Down Hard Rock, Jumpin Jack Flash, which isn't on here but was recorded in the same sessions. I still think that despite the later punks kind of playing lip service to hating all the old shit, that a lot of them secretly loved the Stones.
A lot of my friends that are older than me, they weren't around necessarily, like they weren't teenagers in the late 70s, but they're in their late 50s now. They love the Stones. The Stones are like that exception, I feel like.
And I think a lot of that is just punk bands trying to be different and iconoclastic in a lot of ways. Because when you look at, early stuff like the Ramones, it is 50s rock and roll, just played dirty as hell and sped up.
I think the Stones were above it. They just shrugged it off, didn't they? They just like, we can't compete with it. And they came out with that disco song.
Oh, God.
I think that's we are what we are. I miss you. Was it Miss You?
Oh, old I miss you.
Yeah, baby.
Every time you mention that, I want to play this again.
Mick, you ignorant slut.
I couldn't hear it, unfortunately,
It's
but I'll take your word for it.
It's the SNL sketch with Mick playing Keith Richards and Mike Myers playing Mick Jagger. And he goes, "Oh, Mick, you ignorant slut." But yeah, when I hear some of the tracks on this, I think obviously is a big influence on a lot of American bands, the Heartbreakers, Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers, MC5, Iggy
That's
Pop.
like all my favorite stuff.
There's a lot of Stones in those early American punk bands, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe less in the British, I don't know, but they were the anti-establishment band at the time, the Stones. This made them, this and the drug busts, all that, they were firmly in the sights of the establishment, same as punk 10 years later. So
yeah.
Anyway, yeah, great album. They didn't rest on their laurels well, there's the single cover of Sympathy for the Devil. It wasn't really released as a single in many countries because of the subject matter. The BBC certainly wouldn't be playing it, that's for sure.
Can I make a comment on John Stevens' comment?
You can.
He said something about 1977. Seeing them in Cleveland.
There we go.
That's pretty cool. But at that time, I would have been going to see the Dead Boys in Cleveland.
Indeed. First time I saw this, I've seen the Stones twice. First time was in 1980 at Wembley Arena Stadium, Wembley Stadium in London. So like 90,000 people. I say I saw them. I did hear them, but I couldn't see anything because it was like too big a crowd. Is there a stage? Where's the stage?
That's like me at Live Aid, and I was a little girl, so I was on a blanket on the ground, and all I remember are legs all around me.
But that was it's so fun though, isn't it, Courtney? That was such a fun weekend. We all went down from I was living in Birmingham area that time, went down for the weekend, and naturally there was a tube strike because of the gig. So we ended up walking from Wembley to Waterloo. It was like 8 miles or something to get back to the hotel. But it was worth every second of it. Even though I didn't see much, it was the Stones. And then I saw them again in Edinburgh in the later 90s. And it was still a pretty good gig, actually. Really good gig.
What tour was that in the late 90s? I'm trying to think.
Oh, I think it might have been Bridges to Babylon.
I had tickets to that and couldn't make it.
It was good. They actually had the thing where they went out into the middle of the arena, middle of the pitch.
I remember seeing video, yeah.
And they did Midnight Rambler and Gimme Shelter and stuff in the middle there. It was really good. Better than I expected. Let's put it that way.
Look at that album. That cover does not suit the subject, does it?
No, this is an earlier picture of them
Yeah.
superimposed on a single.
Yeah.
And there's one of the covers that was available. Street Fighting
Chicago.
Man.
That's a Chicago photograph.
But because they didn't really promote singles off these albums in those days, the bands, they didn't put a lot of attention into it. I do like this one, which is the Japanese one.
That's so cool.
Yeah, that's from the actual filmed video of Jumpin Jack Flash. Even
The
though it's
Japanese
Street Fighting
love
Man,
all that makeup and glam and everything. Yeah, they love all that.
even though it was the Jumpin Jack Flash video, it's a single of Street Fighting Man.
Right.
Then, of course, so that was, for me, was the start of that great run that made them this top band in the world, rock and roll band in the world. Others may argue there were other contenders, but Let It Bleed with the Cake by Celia. What was her name? Celia.
She's a famous cook.
Yeah, she became a famous chef. Celia, I can't want to say Imrie. She was an actress. Was it Celia? Somebody? Anyway, she became a famous TV chef that made this Let It Bleed, which of course continued much of the same sound with tracks like Gimme Shelter, Midnight Rambler. You can't always get what you want.
That song used to get on my nerves because it was overplayed, but like it's such a good song, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
But if you try sometime, get what.
It really is just this well-constructed song that, like you say, it's overplayed to hell, but I just can't help but singing along to it.
Yeah. Sticky Fingers with the Andy Warhol cover, of course. With the zip you could actually pull down. Right?
Yeah.
So, Brown Sugar, of course, which is the song they won't play now because it's a no-no.
Yeah.
no, it's a great song, though.
That's great. I was listening to a version of it the other day they did live on British television, and it just rocked so hard. And Mick at the end, he's giving it all, he's ad-libbing, and he's all, well, that was great, fantastic, wow, he's just ad-libbing away. But Wild Horses, can't you hear me knocking?
I was just going to ask that because I can't, it's really tiny on here. And I
Yeah,
couldn't remember.
well, is it not big enough for you, Courtney?
The package isn't big
Now
enough.
I can read it, actually. It's on my phone. You're about this big at the top of my phone.
Yeah, Delia Smith, thank you, David.
Yeah,
Delia
there you go.
Smith did the cake. But yeah, isn't that big enough for you? You're very demanding.
Yeah. Some women are never satisfied.
Yeah, but such great tracks again.
funny.
These are every one of these albums. There's not a bad track on.
Can I jump in again? When I first heard that Can't You Hear Me Knocking,
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that was the Stones. Because there's that fantastic extension, the saxophone. I thought, this is the Stones. I remember it being another one of those moments. Oh my God, it was like a leap.
Bobby Keys playing the sax. Yeah.
It was like a leap forward. A long track like that was fantastic.
Yeah. Exile on Main Street. It's probably my least favorite of the four. I know a lot of people take it as the
like
best
it.
ever, but to me, a double album was a bit too much. They could have trimmed it a little, if you ask me, but it's still got some great and a very languid, dirty, bluesy sound in most of these. Tumbling
Dice is brilliant.
But yeah, Rip This Joint, Rocks Off. Great titles.
Can you make it a little larger?
Yeah. No. Jeez. You're so demanding.
I can see it now.
Always want something bigger.
Third on the Run. Great title.
You're
Ventilator
reminded.
Blues. The titles they had were so great.
Turd on the Run.
I like Sweet Virginia. That taking it the coast of Newcastle again.
Well, by this time they really had mastered country because Graham Parsons was hanging out with them and he was teaching Keith how to do real country.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, songs like Wild Horses or Sweet Virginia. It's like those are straight up country tunes. Like it's not even a little bit tinged. Like it's straight up John Denver country.
Well, it's funny when you watch the documentary about the making of this. Keith says, "Yeah, Graham Parsons was hanging out with us and taught me all this country stuff." But he wouldn't go away. And he said, eventually Keith turned to him one day and said, haven't you got your own band? He did. He was in the Flying Burrito. Haven't you got your own band? You're not in the Stones. Although he liked them having them around because Graham had money and connections.
Yeah.
Which you could get the stuff.
The stimulants.
Yes. Poor Graham. But
yeah.
But yeah, that was the run of albums that they came out of Beggars Banquet.
Magic stuff.
They were on top of the world, and by this time I was old enough to be paying attention. I'm not saying I was old; I was still a kid, but they were like, I would see Brown Sugar being performed on TV, and I'd go, "Wow, what is that? You know, what is that sound? Who are these guys?"
It's like me
So I've
with
kind
all,
of
that's
grown
how
up.
with the 80s, like punky kind of poppy stuff,
Yeah.
you know.
But I grew up. They've
You're
been there
lucky.
all. It's like the Beatles. They've been there all my life.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah. Sorry, Pope. I hit the wrong one.
Although towards the 80s, it became less of the these are the musical institutions that we all know and love, and especially with the Stones, it kind of turned into, going into the 70s and 80s, it turned into how can we miss you when you won't go away?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So before we move on to talk about a couple of other things, because we've got a few other bits and pieces to do with this, I want to talk about. I just wanted to play the opening montage again of as many Beggars Banquets tracks as I could get that there was performances of, just so we can remember how good an album it was.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth and taste. Was like the water that splashes on a stone. Parachute woman, land on me tonight. Hope you guessed my name. And everywhere I hear the sound of down, yeah, just no so it was a time for a change. Girl, and she gets me into fights. Waiting for a ride, girl, we get drunk on Friday night. Drink to the hard-working people. Let's drink to the salt of the earth.
Yeah, I think it's. Thank you, Stephen, for your kind words about that montage. It's always tough putting those together because of copyright.
Yeah.
And so I had to trim these again and again, and just to get the right flow and the right bits. But I think it's just a little taste of the great songs on this wonderful album. Stray Cat Blues there. That was actually one of the better performances from Hyde Park that day.
Yeah, it was pretty sloppy.
It rocks hard. Keith's got the flying V.
Which I had never remembered him playing a flying V, but I thought that was awesome.
I was wondering what song that was because I couldn't hear it.
It's tough in the car. That was Stray Cat Blues, which is one of my all-time favorites. It's a great rocker. One of their best rockers ever. Mick, you ignorant slut, Mick. He's talking about Stray Cat Blues. You know what he's talking about. There's a couple of other things I wanted to talk about this era. So the Stones released the album in December 1968, but they then did the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, which was kind of meant to promote the album. It turned out they never released it for decades after for various reasons. And it had the concept obviously the concept's obvious, but they had the Stones, they had the Who, John Lennon and the Dirty Mac band as John Lennon, Yoko Ono, which is probably why they didn't release it for 50 years.
Yeah.
Taj Mahal, Jethro Tull, and it was
Taj Mahal.
Taj Mahal. I've seen Taj
He
Mahal.
had like a million kids, but I went to college with one of his sons.
I've seen Taj Mahal live a few times, and he's wonderful.
I'm looking at this cover. Is that the witch's hat? Is that Yoko?
Yes, it
Had
is.
to be, yeah.
She should have been in a bag as normal, but
she shouldn't have been on the cover.
So for what Brian, I mean, it was really quite sad, and they don't focus on Brian a lot in the performances because he's basically standing there with a guitar and he's like, is it plugged in? I don't know. He's not there at all. So most of the guitar work's done by Keith. It's a real shame.
Was that him second to the right? I couldn't really.
So Brian is second to the right.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not sure who the girl is, which member of the band that is at the back. But anyway, but it's still, as a historical document, it's pretty good. The Who were great in it. The other bands were all great, and it's great because you get to see John Lennon play live. If you ever watched the Rock and Roll Circus, so John was playing with Keith and some others, and also Eric Clapton, as you can see there. The Dirty Mac band. I think he does Your Blues. I'm not sure he does any other tracks.
Mitch Mitchell on drums, wasn't it?
Was it Mitch? Yeah, it could be. It was a kind of a pickup band. So it was great to see John playing live again, as the Beatles have been on that long hiatus. This next one's for Pope. I want you to tell me the name of the guitar player with Jethro Tull.
I know it.
That would be a very young Tony Iommi.
That is
he was with that band.
That is correct. Tony Iommi with Jethro Tull on the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus.
Like that had to be a very, very specific time period. He was only with the band for like a month or two.
He was with them for a month or so, but it just coincided with this.
He still had the tassels and everything. Although he's still using a Strat here, so it's before he got that Gibson SG.
Yeah, I was just I wanted to show you this one because I knew you'd find it.
Oh, I find that.
I wonder what he thought of the flute.
Yeah, he's probably thinking, can we make that thing louder and more distorted?
No, well, I mean, probably thinking make it go away.
I've heard interviews with him on this time period, and basically, like, what really did it for him was, the fact of how regimented and professional Tull was. Like, band practice started at 9 a.m. and if you weren't there, that was it. You're
done. Our friend Peter was his production manager. He was a businessman. He'll tell you all about it.
Peter did the Stackridge video with us. Yeah.
So I saw Jethro Tull. It was probably when their first album had just been released, and I went to see them in a pub in a place near Hartlepool. They probably didn't want to go to Hartlepool. It was just this back room in a pub, and Ian Anderson came on, and he had like straw in his hair, and he was really disheveled and he kept pulling bits of chicken out of his pocket and eating it and throwing the bones upstairs. I loved it. I was
as you do.
I mean, it was just like, yes, there is an alternative existence,
Yeah. So it was an interesting experiment. I watch a copy if you can. I mean, a lot of it's on YouTube, but the performances are pretty good. But the Stones weren't happy with it, and it got shelved. And then they had the whole fallout with Alan Klein, who was managing them. So it just got shelved for years. But it's a fascinating historical document. I don't know why I copied it. It's Marianne Faithfull, who
she's beautiful.
is at the time convent girl. And then Nita Pallenberg, who was Keith's partner at the time, had been Brian's, but he rescued her from Brian.
Rescued.
Yeah, well, this is from Barbarella as well, this picture. But yeah, Brian was not treating her very well, like physically not very well. So
yeah.
The other thing I did want to touch on in that era is that obviously after Brian died, they did the Hyde Park gig, the free gig in Hyde Park, with Mick Taylor basically rehearsing backstage before he went on. Like, oh shit, I gotta learn these in 10 minutes. Not the greatest of performances, but free gig, free festival. In fact, they were asked, Mick was asked, why are you making it free? He says, well, we haven't really made any money out of these concerts we've done in the past anyway, so we'll make money by selling it to TV, so why bother charging, and it was a big event at the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
500,000 people apparently. But
Jesus.
yes, again, if you're not in the front 50,000, forget about seeing or hearing anything. But
Yeah, this was before the era where they'd have like repeating monitors and stuff like that set up way in the back, so everybody can kind of hear it. It's almost like Woodstock, where if you're at the back of the crowd, you were there, but you didn't hear shit.
That's right. What I like is the guys that are up on, like, you'll think something of this, Granny, these stands with the speakers. How many people are on that? That can't be safe.
I'm sure it wasn't. Yeah, I mean, this is before you got like riggers, and it was all professional. It was, I've got some photographs of they had open air festivals in Hyde Park for a couple of summers before this, and I hitchhiked down from London. There was bands like Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, The Family, Blind Faith, and I've got pictures in the crowd, much smaller than this. It was a much smaller venue. And there's just a couple of WEM columns up on these bits lashed to this simple wooden rigging. It's all very primitive, and bit by bit it got bigger and bigger. And this was obviously huge, but the PA inadequate, and that would not be safe. It probably wouldn't be allowed today.
I wouldn't stand underneath it, that's for sure. But,
no,
I mean, that scaffolding's probably put together by a bunch of roadies with duct tape and steel pipe, not any kind of professional rigor.
Yeah.
I actually feel like I've witnessed some of something put together like that in the mountain town I lived in.
So, I just want to play one more interview clip with Keith, and it's about Brian.
Brian's contribution had been dropping off for quite a while, Brian worked incredibly hard with me in the very, very early days of putting the Stones together, and it was Brian and I who had really got into the essence of this two-guitar thing, of not separating, of trying to get them to sort of go into each other, and you wouldn't care particularly who suddenly flew out and did a little line, and so that you could almost read each other's minds. But Brian also was the first victim of the star trip, and he went off of the guitar very quickly, especially once Mick and I started writing songs. I think he resented that a lot, and his reaction and his answer to that was to sort of just get into being, he'd spend more time shampooing his hair than he would making a record, and he started to fiddle around. Although I will say his contribution in other ways, the colors, the different colors, and that he added by playing around with other instruments. He had an incredible talent for walking into a studio, whatever was lying around. He may have never touched that instrument in his life before, but by the time the song was sort of halfway getting there, he'd have a riff down under my thumb, or a sitar and painted black, sometimes chimes and marimbas, all these kind of things. So he contributed a lot in making the Rolling Stones records have this some of those extra exotic colors going on in the tapestry, in the weave, so the warp and the weft.
So just a little tribute to Brian there, I think.
Very nice.
Yeah. I did end the poll in the chat, which is your favorite Stones album of this period. You can only pick 4 choices, so I picked the 4 albums from Beggars Banquet on. Exile on Main Street comes top with 38%.
That kind of surprises me, actually. I figured Sticky Fingers would be it.
That's what I thought. That's what I picked.
Yeah, Sticky Fingers close to 28%, Let It Bleed 23%, and my favorite, which automatically wins because it's mine, 9%, Beggars Banquet. Screw you all and your opinions.
Stephen Jules Rubin, in the chat says can't argue with Keith. It's funny. I have this like a poster size. It's a pencil drawing, and I cannot for the life of me remember the artist name, but it's like 1 of 50, and it's Keith Richards. They spelled it that way, but it's a drawing of Keith.
Yeah. Thanks for voting in that poll, everybody. I appreciate it very much. I remember the big debate about whether it's Keith Richard or Keith Richards. And he himself has used both over the years. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he has. He
Well,
changed
it's sort of like
himself.
Blackbeard, where it's like, is it Teach or Thatch? Because he used both and spelled it 3 different ways. So it's just like, he's Blackbeard. We're just calling him that from now on.
I think he wants it to be Richards, so he's not connected with Cliff Richard.
Cliff Richard.
I always thought it was Richard.
Bit too squeaky clean.
No, Cliff's the devil. Come on, Devil Woman. That's one of the most evil songs ever. I wanted to just talk about the competition at the time, we don't have a great deal of time left because I'm going to have to wrap up soon, but the environment that they were operating in 68 and early 69, this was their competition. The Beatles' White Album was still huge, had been out for a while, still huge. Beatles didn't tour anymore, of course, but the Stones did. So that made a big difference in their popularity level rising and becoming. Stones ascended to, the Beatles are outside of, for me, any conversation about greatest band in the world. There's something other than that. They're like this cultural phenomenon that kind of sits outside everything. The Stones were the greatest rock and roll band in the world at this period, and they still did it live, Yeah.
But this was the era of supergroups where groups weren't staying together. They were mixing and matching. And there was an all new thing at the time of supergroups, Blind Faith and such like.
Isn't that like Girlfriends too? No.
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix, of course, Electric Ladyland, 68 album. This is who the Stones were competing against. Or it was all in that same scene. They were all together.
Could you imagine being a guy trying to break into the scene in 68 where, you had, Beggars Banquet, Electric Ladyland, all of like the classic albums of the late 60s all came out in 68, 69. Could you imagine being like, the little rock artist who just started in that period? Like, hi guys, I'm here too.
Could have been daunting. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we ran into that. I mean, we came from Hartlepool, and I was just a roadie. But the guys in the band, the ones that did try, they went to auditions, and you were really up against genius.
Yeah, it was hard. But I mean, at the same time, it was a scene, a fertile scene.
Yeah.
In general, which encouraged people, and I think you've said it many times, Granny, on streams that in the bars and the clubs. The bands mingled, small and large, and they weren't really. The Beatles weren't snobs; they always hung out with people, and Wheels of Fire by Cream, of course,
loved it.
Huge band at the time, huge album. The Doors, Waiting for the Sun was huge in that period too, the late 60s. That was their second album, was it? No, can't remember. Jeff Beck's Truth, of course.
One of my favorites.
Setting a template for heavy blues rock. This is what Beggars Banquet was going up against.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Traffic.
Jimmy Miller. That's Jimmy Miller again.
Jimmy Miller again. Traffic are one of my favorite bands of all time, and they were at their peak, coming into their peak too, with their second album.
I'm digging that jacket.
It's crushed velvet. I had a pair of pants like that.
Stevie Winwood, of course, he was in Blind Faith as well. So. Great band, Traffic. Led Zeppelin 1, released in January 69. So you've got Beggars Banquet, December 68, Led Zeppelin 1, January 69. Coexisted in the same universe.
Yeah.
And didn't Deep Purple come out with their first one in 68?
They already had their first album in 68, yeah.
And someone in the chat says, didn't stop Lou Reed.
Sorry, didn't stop Lou Reed, yeah. Tommy by The Who, a little bit later, that was like May 69 or June 69, but they were recording it during the 68 period. So they weren't quiet, they were up to stuff, advancing. Another great example of another American one would be Creedence.
Yep.
Bayou Country, enormous album, enormous band. One of the only two American bands I mentioned on this list, but also a great Americana sound that the Stones had, but very different Americana sound.
I would put these guys up there with anyone for the best American rock band of this period, bar none. Like they are, like if you had to send a band to be like the all-star for your country, these guys would be it for me.
Yeah, so they were competing, but it was also, if you were a fan of rock music at the time, as Granny will testify, it was a glorious era.
Absolutely.
For stuff. Just such great
there was so much great stuff. And I like the club aspect that he brings to it, like the smaller venues and stuff. Because that's how the punk rock scene kind of always was. When I first got into it, I prefer those smaller kind of. I don't like big arena shows at all.
Yeah, the big venue or the small venues are where it's at for I think any kind of rock music, because you a more personal experience, even as the band with the crowd, than, you can see the first 20 rows, and after that, it's just a sea of people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So just a very fertile period, and that's just a handful of the top acts that were dominating. I mean, you had your Astral Weeks, Van Morrison, and all sorts of other great stuff, all being released in that period.
Pink Floyd were developed. I mean, it was that alternative sound.
I prefer the later version, the Punk Floyd.
Yeah.
There's one more. We will have to start wrapping up, I'm afraid, although obviously we could talk about this stuff for hours.
Hopefully, because I have one arm that's getting a sunburn right now.
Hopefully we've done justice to Beggars Banquet and the Stones. I mean, it's the first time we've really talked about them on the show in detail. May not be the last time. Can't bite off too much. We managed to just bite off a section of that. And, but we can't leave without some memes. So, because Keith in particular is exceptionally memeable, so let's finish with some memes on a light-hearted note.
Oh, that's funny.
How about this one? A rare photo of Keith Richards holding Betty White.
Oh, I didn't see the top. It was covered. That's funny.
Here's Keith Richards smoking a cigarette he lit with the Big Bang. Keith Richards and daughters. When they die, he'll inherit everything.
That's so funny. That's like the joke. It's like he just cannot. Like,
he can't die.
He doesn't die. There's so many like jokes about him. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I won't.
We're coming to that one, Stephen. Stephen's mentioned when we're coming to. Hey, Mick, look who I've outlived this week. This is small. I've always told Mick you got to take better care of yourself.
Oh God,
that's what I look like.
Oh dear.
This is you got to read it.
Oh, so
oh, 70, that's so funny.
This is
72.
An old one.
Yeah.
It's an older one, but you didn't know you could get 72 into 29.
Right.
I can't believe wow.
This is my personal favorite. You have to look closely.
Who is that? Mick Jagger, yeah.
It's Nicolas Cage.
Yeah,
Nick Jagger.
Yeah.
I love when they put Nick Cage's face on like obsessed with it.
That's good.
I've outlived Whitney Houston, Michael Jackson, and Elvis. I bet you didn't see that.
Yeah.
Vintage photo of Keith Richards with these.
Oh, keep them coming. Although did they spell Keith wrong there?
They did, yes.
Shame.
Yes.
Richards teaching Willie Nelson how to play guitar.
It's so cute though the way they made that picture.
Oh, that's good. Poor kid's like, what is that in front of me?
And then the famous one.
Oh yeah.
We need to start worrying about what kind of world we're going to leave for Keith Richards.
Look at that picture.
He'll be taking care of all the children or hanging out with them.
And then there's this one.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh dear.
So some Keith memes and some Mick memes for you. That's
I think my favorite Keith Richards joke of all time was like, God is sitting there talking to Adam and Eve, like, I created you and all of the animals for you to rule over. And he's like, Adam just turns to him and goes, what's that guy in the corner? Oh, that's Keith. He was here when I got here.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, that was today's show. I gotta go eat soon. Thank you everyone for being here in the chat. We've had a small but perfectly formed crowd. You've all been extremely active with your opinions and your comments. I really appreciate it very much. Thank you to the mods, Davina and D-Bud Martin, for doing the modding, and Lord Thoth earlier as well was doing some. Thanks everybody for your comments. Saw a couple of new faces, and hopefully you guys will come back for more. Stick around.
Yeah,
come back. Thank you to my wonderful friends for joining me yet again for this nonsense. First of all, Granny, it's always good to see you, mate. Thank you for being here. We
My
will
pleasure.
do something.
Loved it.
We'll do something again soon.
Yeah.
Yes. Go check out our Stackridge video we did. with Peter. A lot of fun, tons of fun. Courtney, my dear, I hope your car is going to get fixed.
You never know with me. I'm always like, I don't know. I'm everywhere.
And nowhere, baby. You're
Yes,
everywhere,
I'm everywhere and
nowhere,
nowhere.
baby. Everywhere and nowhere, baby. Americans don't get that joke. It's a Jeff Beck joke. It's a British one.
I knew it. Yeah.
Have you got anything coming up you want to promote, though, Courtney?
It's the same thing, but we didn't have like a Sunday Night Geekery last night. Next week on Sunday Night Geekery, I'm Mark D with the C's channel. Gosh, I can't talk. Still, standing strong with that. And then whenever I can make it for these, I always try and make the music ones.
I know you do, and I appreciate it very much. I always welcome your insight. And I should find that clip of you and play it again. I don't know where it is. Maybe I'll save that for next time.
I need the watch hours. I'm never going to get a short that's going to have that many views ever in my life. So
someone's joining just as we're wrapping up. It's Gary. I'm sorry.
Gary. My favorite drummer.
Just before we talk to Gary, Pope, have you got anything you want to promote?
Well, you can find me every Saturday night at 11 Eastern over on Rumble, where I do Midnight Mass, a little 2-hour radio show where I just play some of the stuff I've been listening to, some stuff I really think should be getting more attention, and also some stuff that you guys recommend. Like there was a band I'd never heard before that I played on Saturday that I kind of dug. So hopefully you'll join me for that. Mondays, you can usually find me over on this guy's channel.
Bananarama, wasn't it, Pope?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Over on Gary's channel for
Funboy 3
for Military Mondays when I can make it and when we can communicate.
And when he's not drunk.
But other than that, you can find me here every week, and thanks for coming out.
Well, thanks for being here, buddy. Always appreciate it very much. Gary, you're late and gay as usual.
Are you saying I'm latently gay?
No, you're blatantly.
I'm blatantly gay.
And I don't mean that in a pejorative
It's all that gay
sense.
sex I have.
I don't mean it in a pejorative way.
Oh,
I've lost Courtney. Yeah. So you're the guy. You're so old that you taught Keith Richards how to play guitar, didn't you?
Oh, he was a wee lad, yeah.
Wee lad. Well, I'm glad you could make it in. Are you a big fan of late 60s Stones?
I am not a fan of the Stones at all.
All right.
But I like him on his own. I love the song that he did that they use on Slow Horses show.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great tune. And there are some songs they did that I do like, but I just overall wasn't a big fan of it.
Sure. No,
I was more of the Led Zeppelin, the Beatles and shit.
Yeah. Hey, each to their own.
No, yeah. I know a lot of people shit. The host of that show I do on Monday nights, Don Ecker, big fan of the Doors. I can't stand them. I love the instrumentals, though.
If we all liked the same things, life would be boring. So
I'm trying to get Courtney.
I'm glad you made it in. Anything in particular you wanted to talk about before we go?
No, man. I just wanted to pop in because my date just ended with Anima, so I'm like, Brian's still going. I'm going to pop in and say hi.
Well, I'm glad you did. It's always good to see you, buddy.
It's always great to see both of you, man.
Yeah.
I love Courtney. Pope, I can do without. Big G. Good to see you, man.
Big G is here.
The big grandster. We like him. We like him around.
So I want to.
I'm not sure. Have we met before?
So we did some rock and roll rowdies stuff with Gary.
That's where I met him. Okay.
Pop culture.
So I kept going. I know that face.
Yeah.
You just don't recognize me with clothes on. That's what it is.
Right, yeah.
It's this whole gay thing. I get in trouble with it all the time.
I want to plug some stuff of my own. You bastards.
Me too, buddy. Oh, you mean songs and stuff.
Here we go. Right. So next week's show will be, if I can figure out how to produce this frickin' thing. Oh, there we go. Share screen. That's the button. Next week, I'm going to be doing a delayed episode of Cult Comedy Crew. This time, we're going to be talking about Canadian hockey-themed comedy, Shoresy, which is 3 seasons in, spin-off from Letterkenny. So foul-mouthed, misogynist, violent, and that's just the good points of the show.
Sounds like you're talking about Wilco.
So talking about Wilco, yeah. So cult comedy crew. I'll be joined by my friend Brahma, the Brahma Bull.
No, Brahma Bull, yeah.
My co-host of Bourbon and Boarding, because Bourbon and Boarding returns next Saturday night. We're going to be doing a live draft for our fantasy hockey league prior to the hockey season starting. And then that series will be into series 3 of Bourbon and Boarding when the season starts proper. Shoresy show will be on Monday. So it's all hockey for the next few days.
Yeah.
So
hockey.
If you're not Shoresy, then if you've not seen Shoresy, check it out. Find it and check it out. Extremely funny.
I will check it out because I like that other show. It's hilarious.
And I will be later tonight on Comics Division as usual. And my last video I dropped a couple of days ago is a video in my Underlooked Albums series about the band Taste. And there are 2 studio albums they did in their lifetime, Taste and On the Boards, Rory Gallagher's first big band. So check that out. We're getting quite a few hundred views on that one, which surprised me. So
great band.
Yeah. So Gary, tell us about. Oh, I'm getting an echo.
Oh, I'll mute my mic. After I explain it to you, this is the song I just released for my graphic novel, and a film producer whom you know is interested in using it for one of his future action films. And it's called Name on a Bullet. Do you want me to play the sample?
Yes,
it's only part of the song.
Do it.
I can feel it moving somewhat deeper than flesh. You broke me down. You were my greatest sin. Giving you my trust and then letting you in. It's a shot that counts, and there's nothing more. You know you earned it when I come through that door. Throw up your hands, this is the end of the line. Choose your weapons, there ain't no better time. Stop your begging, I told you twice, there ain't no bargains. You know the price, you know what brought me, you know all of your crimes. There ain't no running from the bullet this time. I got your name on a bullet. I got your name on a bullet this time. You got one last chance.
Excellent.
I'm so proud.
You can stop sharing. In the echo.
No, I
want to give it
echo.
shout out to my buddy Dave Bell in Canada is just one of the best guitarists you'll ever meet. And he's the only musician that I work with. Everything else is me.
Well, it was awesome, mate. I've got a copy. Yes, it's really good. Thanks for sharing that.
And you were the first one to buy it.
I was. We'll have to do we'll put together a little show or a video, the two of us talking about your music soon. I think that would be nice.
I'm working on another one. It's going to take me probably 2 weeks to finish that. I think you're going to like. It's heavy rock.
Cool. Nice. Well, thanks for dropping in, mate, and sharing that. It's good stuff. And Davina posted the link to the Patreon.
Well, thanks, Davina.
And I forgot to thank Vince Womack for posting all the links over in Rumble, because we do go out in Rumble too. Vince has been posting links there and keeping an eye on that. Thank you, Vince.
How's the viewership going on Rumble?
I don't do too badly. My Rumble I've got 255 followers on Rumble.
Yeah, you're beating us. I don't know what it is. I haven't figured Rumble out yet.
I get pretty good views. Not spectacular, but they're okay. And I do my radio shows over there, so that's
Twitter and YouTube is all our views. I mean, our Saturday show, it's over, I think, 500 views already since Saturday. And
Good.
I'm happy with that. And I was like, that's good.
Yeah, I got it on Twitter too, but I should go back and check if anybody's watching. If you're watching on
They
Twitter,
are.
thank
I'm
you.
telling you, if you do it, they will come.
Thank you for
Build
watching.
it, they come.
So anyway, thanks everybody for being here. Thank you to all in the chat. I'll be on Comics Division's show later if anyone's watching. Otherwise,
What are we doing tomorrow?
Are we doing something tomorrow?
Yeah, Toxic Tuesday. What are we doing tomorrow?
Oh, Nick Visor's Toxic Tuesday. I think it's Billy Madison.
That's it. It is. It's
Or
Billy
Nick's
Madison.
channel.
Someone told me and I forgot.
I forgot as well.
I love
I
that
can hardly
movie.
think of it till the end of the day, never mind anything else. So anyway, enjoy the rest of your Monday, everybody. Thank you for being here. Don't forget, keep on rocking.